So let's be clear. Ethan Klein is a multi-millionaire YouTuber. Ethan's a hardcore Zionist. His wife, Ela, was in the IDF, has continued to defend the IDF.
You served in the military. How was your experience?
I hated everything about it.
He's denied the genocide.
Gazans, they're being genocided and all this.
These are 3 very small Twitch streamers, and they reacted to a video of his, something that he encouraged people to do.
If XQC re-uploads one of my videos and just sits there watching, I should have the right to sue him.
Yeah.
Look at all that slander. For those of you who don't know, that was Taylor Lorenz, one of the foremost propagandists in America, who lies anytime her mouth is moving. As for the defamation part, especially the part about content theft, it's funny because Ethan Klein went viral for this Leftovers podcast episode, where he spent the better part of an hour calling his former co-host Hassan Piker and XQC a couple of thieves who should be sued for copyright infringement.
One of the things is, I think you'll agree with this as well, is just like, don't leave the video running when you get up
100%.
to go pee.
Yeah, you can't
That's
do
like
that.
pretty basic stuff.
You stop doing that?
I usually only do it with my videos that I know are from my friends.
You do not have my permission to walk away from my
For the
videos.
record.
So Taylor Lorenz knows that everything she's saying about Ethan Klein is a blatant lie, because there have been multiple viral events surrounding Ethan where he has openly stated that he believes the exact opposite of everything she accuses him of. There's no way she doesn't know her information is wrong. So why does she lie anyway? Well, it's because it's easy to get away with.
Ethan knows that he can't pursue any sort of defamation case against these women. He knows that there's anti-slap protections, thank God, in California and other states.
Right. As much as anti-slap laws are great to stop bad people from silencing their critics through bullshit lawsuits, these laws can also be used by career liars like Taylor, who can't seem to figure out how to open her mouth without defaming someone. For context, she was talking about Frogan, Denims, and Caseytron, who openly stole content from Ethan Klein and got sued for it. Something that really almost everyone on the internet's happy about, because people like them are finally being punished for the consistent rule breaking that Twitch turns a blind eye to, and slander, among other stuff that comes out of their streams. And on that note, let's talk about Drake Bell. Drake is primarily known for a Nickelodeon children's show from the 2000s called Drake and Josh, and more recently for his appearance on the extremely popular HBO documentary, Quiet on Set, where he talks about being sexually abused by a former acting coach named Brian Peck around the age of 14. This whole situation was really disgusting, especially considering how much support Drake's abuser got from famous actors after he was found to be guilty. But that's not what we're here to talk about. Instead, let's talk about a different event that Drake is known for from 2021.
Having said that, how do you plead to count 1? Attempted endangering children, felony of the 4th degree.
Guilty.
How do you plead to count 2? Disseminating matter harmful to juveniles, 1st degree misdemeanor.
Guilty.
As if it wasn't bad enough to find out that many of the creators of your favorite shows as a kid were terrible people who preyed on children, also, some of the child stars grew up to be predators themselves. Drake Bell was accused of having an ongoing relationship with a minor from the ages of 12 to 15 while he was in his 30s. The abuse being alleged ranged from soliciting nudes to full-on sexual contact. Ironically, he got accused of doing a lot of the same stuff that Brian Peck had done to him 15 years prior.
He allegedly sent his genitals to a child? You were preying on a fucking fan, man. How despicable.
That was Alexa Nikolas, who was also featured in the Quiet on Set documentary. She's famous for a Nickelodeon show called Zoe 101 and was told to do some pretty child-inappropriate stuff by Dan Schneider when she was on set. I agree with her. It's pretty disgusting that somebody would take advantage of a fan relationship to abuse a child. Drake was on one of the most popular Nickelodeon shows of the 2000s. Millions of people grew up watching that show, and around the time that he was accused, there were constant reruns of it playing, which ensures that a continuous crop of teenagers would be susceptible to idolizing him, which makes them vulnerable to being preyed on. Except, there's one big problem with this. Almost everything Drake was accused of was a lie, or at the very least, unfounded. But that didn't stop droves of people from accusing him of being a child predator anyway.
The New York Times printed that I was a registered sex offender, that I had pled guilty to essaying a minor, like all complete factual inaccuracies of my case, but printed in the New York Times.
Wow.
That wasn't even on the docket to be on the registry, because that had nothing, that wasn't even what the case was about. But all of a sudden, that's what the case is about.
Mr. Bell, who was charged with attempted child endangerment and disseminating material harmful to children, will have to register as a sex offender. Yeah, that's a pretty bad thing to be wrong about. But what actually did Drake do? He did take a plea deal instead of going to trial, which means he pled guilty to child endangerment, and he got sentenced during this hearing here. But what does this all mean? What specific things did he do? Let's talk about it, but before we do, I will say that this is quite a morally nuanced case. It's a long story, but to quickly go over what happened, after Drake and Josh ended, Drake moved on to a music career and developed a fan base, including a 12-year-old superfan from Canada named Sydney who was obsessed with him. Sydney knew someone who knew Drake, so she got special treatment like backstage access, and she got to meet him I think like twice over the course of 3 years. Some of the facts of this case are unclear because there's a lot of missing information, but in 2017 when this all occurred, Drake had much more open boundaries with his fans, he kept DMs open, and he would regularly respond to them. Sometimes he would give out his phone number, which personally I think is very stupid. Appropriate boundaries need to be maintained with fans for the safety of both the creator and the fans. Anyway, because he was overly personable, and because Sydney wasn't getting the attention that she wanted from him, she wanted to marry Drake. So because of these things, Sydney made an alt account on Instagram and started DMing Drake under a different identity from what he would recognize her as. And this is the part where I start to think way less of Drake. Though I know this is common behavior, I've always thought it was disgusting and cringe for celebrities to solicit fans for sex or for nudes. Keep in mind that during this time, Drake was in a relationship, so in my opinion, he was cheating. Now, I don't blame Sydney for doing this. She was a kid at the time, and whether she was being manipulative or not, as some people have pointed out, she's a minor here, so if as a 30-year-old the universe tests you or someone tries to trick you in the hopes that you'll marry them, the point is not the morality of the tester. The point is, don't fail the test. I don't care if she was the one who made the first move. She's a minor. Anyway, so Sydney starts sending lewd photos of herself. That's this image here, but it's been redacted because she was underage. I don't know if her face was included in the picture, but based on the other context around the event, I'm guessing it wasn't. Drake responds, "Wow, great pic, that booty. More?" And the next page is Drake continuing to ask for more lewd photos. There are also shirtless photos of Drake here, but it looks like they're on Sydney's side of the chat log, which means that she was the one who sent them. The conversation goes on, and Drake says, "How old are you now?" Sydney responds, 15. Drake had never asked if she was an adult before asking for lewd photos of her, and that's what he was pleading guilty to. His only saving grace here is that as soon as he found out that she was underage, he cut contact. But personally, I think he was being incredibly irresponsible considering that he was the star of a show for young teenagers, which is why I think he deserved to get punished and why I think he doesn't deserve to be considered completely innocent here. But that doesn't mean he's guilty of everything that he was accused of. If he was, this would be a different video. Now, I don't hold Sydney accountable for the stuff that she did as a minor. However, the following allegations were made when Sydney was 19, and were likely made out of spite because she was mad that Drake wouldn't pursue a relationship with her. And for that, I think she's kind of a terrible person.
On December 1st, 2017, my aunt took me to the Odeon Concert Club to watch him perform. That night, the defendant took me backstage to be alone with him. He started kissing me, and the night ended in him having me perform oral sex on him twice. He preyed on me and sexually abused me. He is a monster and a danger to children.
Everything she says here is almost certainly not true. The facts of this case are publicly available at this link if you want to take a look through them. However, a lot of specific details are murky because there aren't dates listed in important areas, and because Sydney factory reset her phone to, in my opinion, delete and fabricate evidence. But all of this is to say that you can't look at some Instagram DMs and know the entire case. You have to piece the story together by looking through the evidence as a whole. So it's very complicated, but to simplify everything into its base parts, after reading the documents, it's clear to me that Drake didn't really know who Sydney was at the time of this concert, where she's alleging that abuse happened. Which is important because Sydney's story is that all of this abuse is occurring throughout a continuous long-term relationship. Well, side relationship, because Drake was already dating someone. The evidence that there's not really any closeness between Sydney and Drake is in this card for her 16th birthday that her chaperone secretly had signed for her. Sydney claims that she had a multi-year ongoing relationship with Drake, but this card is signed like she is just an average fan, or was signed like they just met, which I think was the case outside of maybe a fan meet and greet that you would do at a convention. I'm so lucky to have such an amazing fan, and now friend. Like they weren't friends before? Second, this card was signed at a concert 3 or 4 months after Drake ghosted her for saying that she was 15, which suggests that she did the Instagram messages on a burner account, and he had no idea that he was messaging Sydney. So in Drake's eyes, there's no connection between the girl that he was DMing and the girl that he sees at the concert. This whole allegation doesn't make sense. He's ghosting her on Instagram, which is the easiest environment for him to prey on her, but then he's out in public a few months later with a bunch of adults around trying to assault her? This sounds like a story that a teenager made up who doesn't understand human psychology very well. Even more damning for Sydney's case, 2 adult witnesses that were at the concert said that Sydney's version of the story was not true at all, and there were no moments where she was with Drake by herself.
I remember you mentioning in the transcript that you knew the victim's mom and even knew the victim technically since she was in her mother's belly.
Yes.
At no time she was alone with him.
Absolutely not. 100% not. The only time she went into that room was when all three of us went into that room. She sat out in that hallway with me.
So there were two separate witness testimonies from this event in Ohio that said that Drake was never alone with Sydney. The first one I showed was a longtime family friend, well, former family friend, named Darlene, who knew someone who knew Drake. She sacrificed that friendship to stand in defense of the truth, so good for her. And the second witness was the person who knew Drake, his photographer, Kathy.
They stepped inside the door when he opened the door, but then Darlene ended up sitting in the hallway with her. Her aunt went in his room to get the card signed. The rest of the time they were in the hallway. She has pictures of them taken with him in the hallway.
Right.
So, and she was never out of Darlene's sight, ever. I mean, Darlene was sitting next to her the entire time. Then later she comes out and says all this stuff happened, which is literally impossible.
Uh-huh.
You know, the only person alone with him for any time was her aunt.
So not a good look for Sydney here and her allegations of assault against Drake. And just to take a second to clarify, Sydney went to a handful of Drake's concerts, but I think she only saw him once before the Cleveland show that was just mentioned, which is all that's relevant because it was directly following the Instagram DMs where he ghosted her after she said she was 15. All of this is confusing, but the point is that Drake did not pursue her after finding out her age, and multiple witnesses are saying that Sydney's story is false. Now, if you remember from a few minutes ago, the girl interviewing the witnesses is Alexa Nikolas. Alexa had previously released a video on Drake where she called him a horrible person, a predator, and she stood in line with his accuser.
I stand with that victim of Drake Bell. I stand with her, and I definitely am disturbed by Drake Bell in general.
Initially, Alexa was very hostile towards Drake until she saw the actual evidence. And let me just say that for the most egregious claims, the evidence was so stacked against Drake's accuser that Alexa completely flipped her opinion on him.
I see Drake Bell not creating a solid boundary between him and her at all associating. What I don't see is Drake Bell pursuing a child. The evidence does not get me to that type of decision.
Again, I think Drake deserved to be punished. I think he deserves to be called out for exploiting a power relationship with his fans. I think it's reasonable to question why he was asking for nudes from fans without verifying their age when he's famous for being on a children's show. However, I don't think the evidence shows that he's a child predator or a danger to children in the future. Again, this situation is very morally nuanced, and honestly, I think Sydney and Drake both look bad here. While I don't hold Sydney accountable for the stuff that she did as a minor to instigate this, I do not appreciate her demeanor as a 19-year-old, which included her almost certainly telling fabricated stories of abuse, because doing that harms people who are actually victimized in that way. It allows real abusers to accuse victims of being false accusers, and it allows them to say, "The Matrix is after me," instead of being held accountable for their crimes. That being said, this is actually where our main story starts. In terms of this video, the important thing that happened here is not Drake being seen as innocent of the most egregious allegations. What I actually want to focus on was the moment from Alexa Nikolas where she changes her mind on Drake Bell to argue in favor of the evidence and not her initial emotions about the case. This was a huge moment.
What I don't see is Drake Bell pursuing a child. The evidence does not get me to that type of decision.
Understand the consequences of Alexa sticking with the actual evidence. Her audience, and the survivor community in general, is full of radical leftist Me Tooers who will wholeheartedly believe any inane allegation that happened like 25 years ago with no police report or any actual evidence outside of the accuser's personal story, even if that story is missing key details or key witnesses are saying the assault never happened. Understand how much of a sacrifice going against an audience full of these types of people is, especially these days where everything is so polarized that a father of two can be publicly executed during a debate, and people are so married to their ideology that they'll say, "Well, you know, actually it's a good thing that a guy was shot because he had ideas that I don't like and he was sort of mean to people who I agree with one or two times." Ethan Klein had a similar audience to Alexa Nikolas, and ever since he said maybe we should stop promoting terrorism, they have been nonstop harassing him, doxing him, threatening to kill him, and they've been trying to alienate him from his children. So anyway, instead of leaning further into her beliefs about Drake Bell after seeing additional evidence, which is usually what we see from this group, Alexa essentially sacrificed her career to say she was wrong and Drake is not guilty of sexual assault against a minor. Alexa spent multiple hours going over all the evidence and talking to witnesses on her channel. Despite laying everything out, her comment section is a cesspool of former audience members calling her all kinds of names. Meanwhile, if you go to the video of the actual sentencing, it's a bunch of more reasonable people saying, hey, where's all the evidence of all these horrible things that the victim said was happening?
What the victim is claiming to have occurred here, not only am I saying that it did not happen, not only would Mr. Bell say that that did not happen, but the evidence in the evidence in this case would suggest it did not happen. And again, we all know that this prosecutor's office would pursue child sex charges and go to great lengths and aggressively, as they should, and we've seen it many times. If they felt that that was a provable case, I'm sure we would not be talking here today about an attempted child endangerment and a disseminating matter harmful to a minor.
Yeah, that seems reasonable. However, on the radical Me Too side, this was the narrative.
When you watch the sentencing video, what ends up happening is the first half is the woman reading her impact statement. The second half is Drake's defense attorney responding to that and being like, literally, he's like, I need to call her credibility into question. And then it's like 15 minutes of him just throwing out like every victim blaming example in the book. And he also, as lawyers do, as is their job,
right,
he uses legalese and he uses the way that the legal system works against the victim and in the favor of his client.
Yeah, asking for evidence that you were assaulted when two adults who were there said that you weren't is just victim blaming. But anyway, allow me to introduce you to the girl from the previous clip, Kat Tenbarge. Kat Tenbarge is a journalist who writes for NBC. Well, she used to write for NBC. And she's also known for this.
I remember Kat from back during the Depp versus Heard days. Kat, along with several others, were diehard Amber Heard stans, could not take any criticism of Amber Heard. They called it all misogyny. They called everything misogynistic, etc. They were not being impartial. They were, in fact, quite biased towards Ms. Heard.
To get more to the point, Kat Tenbarge is being sued by Alexa Nikolas for defamation over statements that she made around the Drake Bell situation. Let me just start by saying that I can't understate how fucking despicable of a person Kat Tenbarge is, and how much I can't wait to watch this lawsuit unfold. While there was moral nuance with the prior subjects, there's not a lot of moral nuance with Kat.
Kat, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Of course she's friends with Taylor Lorenz. Taylor is the master of defamation and doxing and encouraging domestic terrorism. Earlier I mentioned Charlie Kirk, and naturally when he was murdered, Kat's initial response was to smirk, and then a few days later do a podcast defaming Charlie with Taylor and some other guy named Matt.
Did you see Charlie Kirk was just shot?
Really?
Yes.
Wait, did they hit him?
Yes, maybe. So much of what Charlie Kirk said was straight up misinformation and just bigotry.
Charlie Kirk was violent in his words.
His style is inducing fear in others. Don't give the other side the opportunity to speak, just like stamp them out of existence. He has nothing to fear. He's a white conservative man. Like, it's all such a false bad faith premise that like people are being uncivil and violent. The people who are uncivil and violent are Charlie Kirk and his friends.
Ethan Klein is a raging misogynist who hates women. Excellent piece by Kat Tenbarge. This is stunning praise from her friend Taylor, so let's see what kind of journalism Kat does. Well, it's an article where she's defending Hassan Piker. Of course she's a Hassan groupie.
This is not journalism. This is just slop with peace and love.
In this article, Kat is defending Hassan and the three idiots who think that copyright infringement is okay, as long as you really don't like somebody. Fortunately, the courts don't seem to agree. Keep in mind that the reason that Ethan is punishing them in this way is because people such as Denims were fostering a false narrative about Ethan's parenting in the hopes that it would encourage people to call the CPS so they would take his kids away. But it's okay because a 3 and a 5-year-old won't remember being interrogated by the CPS under the implication that they're being raised by abusive parents.
You're not forming memories at 3 years old, and it's very rare that you're forming memories at 5 years old.
Her defense for sending the CPS to break up our family and to interrogate our 3 and 5-year-old is that, don't worry, kids don't remember stuff. Pretending as if interrogating my 3 and 5-year-old sons couldn't possibly cause any damage because they can't remember is the most insane, monstrous thing I could even imagine somebody to say about this.
Let me be clear to people like Kat Tenbarge. If someone tried to get my kids taken away over some retarded political differences, they would be lucky if all I did was try to sue them for copyright infringement. You want to pretend that you're a part of the survivor community, and yet you're out here in support of people like Denims, who has no problem defending people who bragged about being child predators like Keffels.
This morning when I woke up and opened Reddit, because of course that's what I do the second I wake up every morning.
Again, another thing that we could have easily guessed. So now that we've established the kind of journalism that Kat Tenbarge does, what actually happened in this case between her and Alexa Nikolas? As I said before, the whole thing started with Drake Bell and a video that Alexa made in October of 2023, where she calls Drake a predator and shares her support for Sydney.
I stand with that victim of Drake Bell. I definitely am disturbed by Drake Bell in general.
Around the time that Quiet on Set was released in 2024, Kay Taylor, a producer on that show, shared the public court documents from Drake's case with Alexa, showing that Sydney didn't have strong evidence that Drake was a danger to children, and so Alexa removed her initial video on him. I mean, I would have removed it too. That's the reasonable and moral thing to do. However, like I said, while it is a noble cause to try to help victims to get justice against their predators, particularly if they were victimized as children, the survivor community is full of radicalized, insane people, and sadly, a lot of opportunistic grifters, and they did not like that Alexa removed her video on Drake Bell for the sake of the truth. When in reality, to anyone who actually reads the court documents, it is obvious that Drake was not guilty of sexual assault. But to put it in a way that will help people in my community better understand, many of these people are fans of that stochastic terrorist Hassan Piker, and we all know that if you go against the narrative in any small way or are a full-on apostate in that community, everyone and their grandmother will try to ruin your life. I mean, that's what they did to Ethan Klein. Hell, these types did it to the popular feminist Lacey Green a bunch of years ago for the crime of being friendly to a political opponent. In fact, this situation reminds me a lot of what happened to Lacey Green. This is a very radicalized group, and they will not accept deviations from the official narrative. Anyway, the aftermath of Alexa saying that she was wrong about Drake Bell was accounts like Exposing Rich making like 4 million tweets saying that Alexa was defending predators. Because of that, and because Kat Tenbarge is an opportunist, while she was working for NBC, she began writing an article and asked Alexa for comment.
But guess who knocks on my door? Kat Tenbarge.
She sent you a list of 18 very specific, and I don't know if you would call it passive aggressive or just aggressive.
I think it was aggressive. That's how I felt.
The letter was accusatory.
Yes, it was like they were doing a hit piece on me.
Kat sent a bunch of questions to Alexa and asked for comment. These questions 100% make the article look like a hit piece, and we know that Kat is a propagandist based on her slander of Ethan Klein and Charlie Kirk. By the way, this was a hit piece from Kat where she worked with a stalker of Alexa's who moved 10 minutes away from her so he could more effectively harass her. Alexa had filed a restraining order, which makes it a criminal violation to talk about her online, but don't worry about that because there are journalists out there like Kat Tenbarge who will aid malicious stalkers in circumventing court orders.
She obtained a restraining order against me using similar false claims she made to his court. This is a statement given to her by your stalker, who's not supposed to talk to you or even really about you.
Oh, and imagine, I said again, that clause that's in there as well, that he can't talk about me on social media. If she were to reach out to him and get comment, right, that could then be some tweet for MSNBC to put out, or like a statement from him, and that's a way to bypass a court order.
Right.
And then she goes on to say to my stalker what I told her in my answers to her about him. It's like, don't talk. Anything you're giving him puts me in danger, you asshole.
So she was giving your stalker the answers to the question.
Yes.
To her report. That's insane.
You know, I found the email correspondence between them was through him filing her own section asking the courts to terminate the restraining order. He used Kat to defend him. Good for you guys. I'm glad you're in a stalker's request to terminate a restraining order with kids involved.
Fortunately, the restraining order got renewed because of what Kat did. But based on the public record, in my opinion, Kat is a predator. If she actually cared about victims, she would never collaborate with and enable a stalker to pursue someone who has kids. Which brings us to the actual defamatory claims.
As we all know, there's a huge market for going after celebrities. Everyone wants to dig up dirt on celebrities. And of course, a professional dirt digger is Kat Tenbarge. In this case, Kat Tenbarge is accusing Alexa, Miss Nikolas, of sending out sealed court documents related to a underage person. Sealed documents, the word sealed means they are confidential, they're for the court, they're not supposed to be circulated out there, and they're accusing Alexa, she was accusing Alexa of leaking these documents. And you can see this here where she says, all this proves is that you, speaking of Miss Nikolas, have been sending around sealed documents from Drake Bell's court case unprompted. As the text from you shows, I did not want them and you insisted. So trying to say that Nikolas was spreading these, maliciously and was trying to get this information out, this secret information out there, all in an effort to undermine his underage victim's testimony that you previously defended. So trying to say that, hey, you're trying to target a victim. Really, really vile stuff.
So from Kat's own words, through this document and through interviews that I've watched, Kat's defamatory allegations were that Alexa is secretly friends with Drake, which is not true, and now she's defending a predator and trying to harass his victims by leaking sealed, unredacted documents in the hopes of, making Sydney relive her trauma, and maybe in the hopes that people would use the documents to dox and harass her. Again, all of which is not true. The documents were publicly available, they are redacted, and if you watch Alexa's videos, you can see that she still isn't a fan of Drake after going through the case.
They are not sealed. And I told her they were not sealed multiple times.
Because of the false narrative that Kat created, Alexa is suing her for $150,000 or more, or a lot more, plus punitive damages. And this is a slam dunk lawsuit. Well, nothing is guaranteed, but Kat is probably going to lose this, and she deserves it. Thank God these people are being punished for what they're doing. Now, to be clear, the defamatory statements were largely these Twitter posts. The article that Kat was going to write on Alexa never ended up getting published, as it was obviously going to be defamatory, so Alexa informed NBC's legal team, and NBC just so happened to include Kat in a series of layoffs. Essentially, they fired her.
Kat Tenbarge, a former reporter at NBC News who recently went independent.
Yeah, why did she have to make her own news organization, Taylor? Almost 2 weeks ago, I found out I was one of 40 people getting laid off from NBC. Those who know me know I've wanted to go independent for a long time. Her logo is a snake. Never have I seen something more appropriate. So Kat Tenbarge tweeted that Alexa released sealed court documents unredacted and proceeded to echo the sentiments that she is a predator.
I got left in the dust when Kat did this to me. People really believed I was this really seriously evil person.
Yeah, this hurt her massively. Her YouTube comment section is an unsalvageable cesspool now. Kat also recruited the help of a YouTuber named Adam McIntyre to defame Alexa because, in his words, Kat and him are best friends, his following is much larger, and he's not the only channel with a much larger following than Alexa who is lying about her for views. Kat is very good at weaponizing her friends against her opponents. Now, when it comes to situations like this, I always like to give the opposition a chance to defend their viewpoints, which needs to be done in two segments. The first being Kat's coverage of the event, and the second being Adam McIntyre's coverage. Because in my opinion, Kat is using Adam as a mouthpiece against Alexa because his influence is much higher than hers. That being said, understand that Kat is very much trying to represent herself as an expert on the Drake Bell case.
If you're, just listening to the audio version of this, Kat has no notes in front of her about any of this. Kat is a scholar on all of these cases, and I just want to quick interlude to commend you on the fact that you know every detail of all of this stuff. I remember talking with you about Amber Heard. Mm-hmm. Your ability to recall all of the specifics of all of these events is pretty remarkable.
Well, thank you.
Right. So if you're an expert, then you should have known that the documents on the court proceedings between Sydney and Drake Bell were public and that Alexa did not leak them. Now, outside of this tactical mistake here, Kat Tenbarge is an incredibly skilled manipulator. To be honest, if I didn't know the facts of the case, I would have believed her version of the story.
So he pleads guilty to 2 charges that are not related to anything physical that happened.
Correct.
But that are about text messages.
Yes. This is not uncommon. A lot of times when you bring a case to court, there will be a range of allegations that are made. And the responsibility of the prosecution is to provide evidence for these various allegations. But a lot of times there isn't strong enough evidence to prove the full extent of what's being alleged. In this case, they seem to have reached an agreement, the prosecution and the defense, that they had strong enough evidence for Drake to plead guilty on these 2 charges. And then he wouldn't have to go to trial. He would just have to serve probation, and they would essentially drop the rest of it.
So to sum this part up here, Kat is trying to lead the audience into believing that Drake is guilty of everything he was accused of, but they simply didn't have enough evidence. That's not the case because what she left out and flat out did not address is the fact that there were 2 witnesses who were there with Sydney saying she was never alone with Drake, and a third witness, one of Sydney's high school friends, who gave the sentiment that Sydney was jealous of Drake's girlfriend. That shows motive for her to lie, which is important because one of the things that Sydney does is message Drake's girlfriend, accuses him of sexual abuse, admits to having multiple accounts because that's important too, and then puts quite a bit of effort into trying to convince his girlfriend Janet to break up with him. Actually, they might have been married at this point. I mean, morally, Sydney is right. Janet should have broken up with him because he did cheat on her. They got divorced a few years later anyway. I don't think Drake is beating the POS allegations anytime soon. But the important thing here is whether or not Drake assaulted a minor. I don't think the evidence shows that, and the issue with Kat's coverage is that she, as an expert, ignores key witness testimonies that contradict Sydney's story and ignores the testimony of her friend who said that she was jealous of Drake's ex-wife or girlfriend at the time, which gives her a motive to lie. Again, not to say that Sydney is responsible for what she did as a child. Drake was twice her age. He should have held proper boundaries, and maybe he shouldn't have cheated on his ex-wife. But as for Kat, these are important points that you would not omit if you were trying to be honest. Just to further emphasize here, despite me not liking Drake as a person, the reason I'm so insistent on the evidence is because if we don't stick to the evidence, it could set a precedent for false allegations in the future that will 100% be weaponized against people you like, or maybe even you yourself. False allegations get weaponized all the time, especially in politics, which is why we have standards of proof. Like I said, Kat is convincing enough that if I didn't spend hours reading through the case documents and connecting the dots, I would have believed her narrative. And people like her know that you don't have that kind of time to personally research stuff like this, so they know they can get away with lying to you, which is why defamation laws exist. As for her friends, they also know they can lie by omission to craft whatever narrative they want, which is where Adam McIntyre comes in. Again, Adam has personally stated that Kat Tenbarge is his best friend.
The way that you have harassed my best friend, Kat.
She's not harassing Kat. Kat tried to write a defamatory hit piece on Alexa to, in my opinion, boost her own career at NBC, and Alexa is defending herself against that defamation. How is this not victim blaming? By the way, before the body was even cold, Adam McIntyre was out there slandering Charlie Kirk too.
I also think it's important to note that Charlie Kirk has been actively engaging in political violence since he came onto the scene, and political violence can also literally be something that doesn't happen with a weapon, can be with his words and his propaganda as well. Someone who doesn't care about school shootings, also someone who said that to protect the Second Amendment, we should lose a couple people every year to gun violence.
So anyway, I've listened to a few hours of Adam's videos on this subject, and I'm not saying that it doesn't exist because he's done hours and hours of live streams, but I have not once found him talking about the most egregious allegations around his positions on Alexa Nikolas. For example, there's this video here from Ethan Klein where he and Alexa discuss the case. Adam admits that he's seen it.
This was a pre-filmed interview that they've posted on the H3 channel. So this is 1 hour and 50 minutes of them, talking about me, talking about Kat. There's no one Ethan Klein hates more than me, and there's no one Alexa Nikolas hates more than Kat Tenbarge.
Now, there's a lot of stuff that goes on in this video, but you would think that if you're a person who is speaking in the defense of victims, you would address the moment where Alexa says that Kat worked with and helped her stalker circumvent the law. That was a major allegation that Alexa made, and maybe it's not true. Maybe there's more nuance to the situation than Alexa made it seem. Does Adam address this moment? No, which makes me think there wasn't any nuance, so he's avoiding the issue. He also addresses zero of the criticisms of the allegations against Drake. But I mean, he will say that Drake pled guilty.
Alexa Nikolas, as we know, was a part of Quiet on Set. Drake Bell was also a part of Quiet on Set. Now, before Quiet on Set came out, in October of 2023, Alexa Nikolas made a video saying that calling Drake Bell out, and we are aware that Drake Bell has his own accusations and has actually pled guilty to child endangerment and a misdemeanor charge of having harmful matter to juveniles.
Right, he pled guilty, but that's not why he lost his career or why his career was ruined. The egregious allegations were Sydney saying that he committed sexual assault. Not only did she not have strong evidence of that, but witness testimony said she was lying. He knows all this information is out there, he's just choosing to not address it, and because of that, I think that his and Kat's position is really indefensible, so they're resorting to defamation and drama farming to try to ruin Alexa's reputation to the extent that people won't believe her when she tells the truth about Drake. And by the way, it worked. Alexa lost this battle. A lot of people lose these types of battles, which is why anti-defamation laws exist.
These people like Kat Tenbarge and others that defame people openly, are going to eventually defame the wrong person. They're eventually going to defame a plaintiff like Miss Nikolas, who has money, motive, and is not able to be dismissed as misogynistic, political, etc. This is something purely factual. This is something purely legal. And because of that, this is very, very damning. for Miss Tenbarge.
Right. At some point, they're going to mess with the wrong person. At some point, they're going to mess with the person who is willing to defend themselves, and then things aren't going to be so fun. Like I said, Alexa is suing for $150,000 or more, hopefully a lot more, plus punitive damages, and she has a very strong case. Kat is probably going to lose, which of course is why, much like Frogan tried to hide to avoid getting served by Ethan Klein when she committed copyright infringement, or much like Noah Samson has been hiding for like a year hoping that Ethan will give up and trying to rightfully sue him for defamation. So much like these two, Kat Tenbarge is so screwed in this situation that she's been fleeing being served for months. Don't worry though, they got her, so I guess we'll see how this all pans out. I think it's pretty clear here that we're entering a strong era of F around and find out, and a lot of people are finding out. The lesson learned here is that if you're mad about stuff like this, then the cure is to become that wrong person to mess with. You be that landmine that people are afraid to step on. Kat and her friend group want to defame people or work with predators to harass them? Well, eventually they're going to pick the wrong target, and oops, now you might be $150,000+ in debt. Have fun paying that off. And speaking of fun, I gotta say that I've had a few opportunities to be someone's wrong person, and I thoroughly enjoyed the process. The real secret here is that these people are almost always some of the most weak-willed people on the planet, and the only reason they've had success doing bad things is because nobody stands up to them. So it's a real shot to them when somebody finally says, I'm not going to put up with it. Be that somebody. Anyway, thanks for watching, follow me on Twitter, and I'll see you in the next video.